So, Mob Psycho 100 not only has just concluded Season 3, it actually concluded the story in general. With 3 seasons, we got to witness a boy named Mob, Kageyama, who had these psychic abilities that were extraordinary, and throughout the journey met so many different characters who used him, who were friends to him, who were enemies to him, and to see how the final villain, the final opponent that he had to face up against after all these extraordinary events, was actually himself. The powers that he was ashamed of, that he was locking away, that in return took so hold of him that he became a walking apocalypse. And to see him not only accept himself, powers, the potential of rejection and all, the fact that he can come out of that rejection smiling and then, yes, breaking down and crying, but looking towards the future in such a positive light, there's no better way to end Mob Psycho than what we just saw with episode 12 of season 3. And I think one of the things I really appreciate about how they decided to wrap everything up is that they kind of give everyone a little bit of a spotlight, that every character that had some sort of impact on Mob's journey was seen in this episode. The Body Improvement Club, the fact that they were more than just those mean characters, like they really did become best bros to him. And just to see how even after the initial rejection, which Mob basically, he explains as she says, like, I still haven't seen you that way, I never really thought of you that way, but it's not like they cut ties or anything, they're still talking every night. And what I really like about that scene is that when you look at it from an actual logical, cool, calm, and collected view, he got turned down because there was never any signs in present-day Mob Psycho 100 where it felt like they were flirting together or she had these romantic feelings. But I think one of the things that can happen is that once that feelings are out there, there is the potential that maybe she could start considering him more than that. But at the end of the day, they very well could just remain very good friends. And I mean, you can't force someone to feel the same way you do about them, right? And I think that the fact that Mob Psycho 100 was bold enough and brave enough to say, you might get turned down. Maybe in the future, she might see you differently, depending, because I mean, now that Mob actually accepts himself, he's not as bumbling, he's not as trapping himself in this cage, maybe there is potential. But the likely bet is that she just said no, and that's okay. And Mob was actually okay with it. Yeah, it hurt him because of all the feelings that he kept bottled inside, but it feels so much better to at the very least get those feelings out there and be able to move on with your life. And the fact that this was all about moving on, and I mean, I wasn't expecting Reagan to be the one to calm him down the way that he did, but it was such a perfect directing choice because Reagan and Mob's journey has more or less kind of reached a great point at the end of season 2, or at the very least once you left season 2, right? Even though he may not have explicitly stated out loud that I am a liar, I am a con artist, exactly in the way that he did in this episode, the knowledge was out there. But what better way than to have more or less the Mob that we come to know and love almost completely evaporated inside this eternal hell. And Reagan comes in and says the one thing that even Kageyama wasn't expecting, that I lied to you, I used you. But honestly, without these lies, I never would have met you. And I think it's such a beautiful way to calm down a scene because did we really want someone to punch Mob awake? No. Did we really want someone to come in and use some extraordinary powers to blow apart this scene? No. The thing about this whole thing is that we've had these extraordinary fights this season, and we've had them in prior seasons. But the fact that the entire final conflict that we dealt with in this show was Mob accepting himself and getting over this trauma, I thought was absolutely perfect. And I thought the way they detailed it, I mean, the scene when initially Reagan was running after Mob and, you know, he was getting tossed into cars. I mean, Truck-kun was trying to make his second guess appearance, failed miserably, thankfully. And just to see it, just so polished and so refined, you couldn't help but just feel excited about where the show is about to go, even though it felt so painful to see a boy like Reagan be so bloodied and beaten. Now, we do get to see the return of Dimple, which honestly I wasn't expecting. I thought they were actually committing to keeping Dimple gone. I think in terms of how they explained how Dimple came back, it does make sense for the Mob Psycho 100 world and rule set in terms of the abilities, how he could be summoned and everything. I don't think in any way it doesn't make sense. It completely does. It works, and I think for another reason, like Mob losing Dimple, that was a big part of it. So having Dimple and Reagan there, I think it does kind of add that extra layer to help cool down the boy. And I really liked what they did with the visuals when it's like initially when his like almost shadowy, fiery blast form, that energy that was radiating off of him, it kind of just cooled down. It wasn't like he looked normal Mob still, but he was a lot more cool, calm, and collected, and I love what they did visually. Now, in terms of my feelings of Dimple coming back, do I wish he would have stayed gone? Personally, yes. Do I think it ruins the episode or the show? No. I don't want people to say, no, Brandon, you're wrong. Him coming back is 10 out of 10. You can feel that all you want. Don't get me wrong. In my opinion, the only thing I would have changed about Mob Psycho is I would have committed to keeping Dimple gone. Just because I think that's another part of life. People do sometimes just end up dying unexpectedly and you wish you had more time. And I think it would have been a nice way to continue the show. Painful, yes, but do I think it works still in Mob Psycho 100 fashion having him there for Reagan's birthday party? Absolutely. And I think it does make Mob's end of this show a lot more easier to swallow because it is a very hopeful and optimistic note. So it's one of those things where I'm perfectly content with how they brought Dimple back, how they explained it, and the fact that he is back. It's just, if I could change one thing about the show, would I change anything? I would have kept Dimple gone. That's just my personal opinion. People are completely fine to disagree with that, but like I said, it's not something that ruins it or makes me take a point away. I think this show's a 10 out of 10, but there's always one thing usually in a show that if you had the writer's pen, would you change something? There's usually something everyone would change. And for me personally, I think Dimple's sacrifice, I would have kept it there, but that's just me. But I mean, from the title of the video, from my praise of the show, it says it all. I think this is one of the best anime that has ever been produced. And I think one's writing in terms, because the only bit of the Mob Psycho manga that I read was a majority of what season 1 covered. I did read that just in comparison initially when that show finished airing in season 1. With that said, I can't compare seasons 2 and 3's manga content, but the thing that I have seen notoriously stated is that basically Studio Bones took that manga and just elevated it. And based on what I saw they did with season 1, I mean, I imagine they've been doing that all 3 seasons. And I think the fact that Studio Bones took such passion and care to elevate a story, this personal, normal story surrounded by the supernatural anomalies, it's fantastic to see what this show ended up being by its end. Surrounded by so much supernatural, so much self-hate, a boy ends up accepting himself, and to see him try to climb up that pole to save the cat before it jumps to freedom itself, it just says it all about how this show has wrapped up and why I can't wait to rewatch it all in one go, because this show is a masterpiece, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. I really think what made Mob Psycho special in so many ways wasn't the crazy production style or the explosive action that we would see sometimes, but it's the fact that the way they handled a lot of those central character pairings, and I think really it's the Mob and Reagan pairing that has really elevated the show, because Season 1, as masterful as it really was like what they did with Reagan and Mob over seasons 2 and 3 that has made me really praise it to the point of saying it's a modern classic, and that 10, 20 years from now, this show will be talked about in the same caliber that a lot of the big shows still are, in terms of like what people say, like, hey, you're newer in anime, you gotta check out these classics. And I think most people could probably agree with that statement, unless for some reason you watched all 3 seasons of Mob Psycho 100 and barely liked it. I loved it. Great finale. I honestly probably will have to own this one at this point. I need to go buy the Blu-rays because it was such a masterpiece. But let me know your thoughts and feelings on either this episode, the season, the show as a whole. Do let me know what you're feeling down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you're new around here. Now, there are a bunch of live reactions going on over on my Patreon, and while you're there, you can also get video shoutouts like a few are about to get here. So we got KM, Brian, and the Good Shark. So consider supporting the Patreon if you want to have access to perks like those. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.